Hello, Internet, and thank you very much for tuning into the Cloud Native FM podcast. And today I'm really excited. I'm meeting an expert, and I'm knowing him for a very long time. I think 3, 4 years back. Then I starting knowing his wonderful work in the Cloud Native space, and started following him on in Twitter. And today I'm finally meeting him. Let's give you some insight what we are discovering today. I heard people has some skepticism around platform engineering, and it's all about. They often describe that platform engineering is trying to solve a problem in the DevOps world that wouldn't exist if we had devoted more time to aligning and structuring the team. Platform engineering is focused too much on solving the problem exist only for reason that that tool complexity brings in, and we weren't quite sure those tools exist in a stable form in the longer run. Platform engineering is solving complexity just because of too many stages in the app lifecycle management and the overwhelming cloud native computing foundation landscape, and leaving behind the most important question and the big question: how what has to be done to structure and maintain right balance for the platform engineering team. And for that I invited my guest Romero Barazilla from Mexico, all over the continent, from the North South America. And thank you very much, Romero. Can you give your small introduction where you work and your extracurricular activities, and then we jump into the conversation?
Yeah, hey Sam. Thanks so much for having me. Very excited to talk about the platform engineering. Those kind of like questions you said at the beginning are very juicy and interesting, and I think we can talk a lot about that. But before best meeting you all, as I said, my name is Ramiro. I am the founder, co-founder, and CEO of Octeto. Octeto is a platform that runs on Kubernetes that helps software teams run dev, test, and preview environments on demand. We automate all your dev experience so you can spend all your time working on your thing and not on setting up containers and microservices. I am from Mexico, grew up there. I now live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I live in Oakland. Our company is remote, so I get a chance to work from home. This is my home. This is my office here in Oakland, and very excited to be here. I think you're muted, Tim.
Thank you. I'm saying you're the first guest on this show, I think, is from New Zealand. Not originally from New Zealand, but you actually right now in the New Zealand. And New Zealand has this wonderful rugby team that won't defeated
Oh no, but I mean
anybody.
Oakland, California.
Auckland, California. Got it.
I know it always gets it's very funny because I've gotten that confusion many times because I guess Auckland, New Zealand is more famous, which is funny because I have a friend that lives there and we were talking about this exact topic 2 weeks ago.
Yes, absolutely. That's quite challenging if you're having a same name
I
for
know.
absolutely, absolutely. So let's start the conversation from this point. I want like one of the challenging question that I see, and a lot of the skepticism is on around platform engineering. I mean, we circle back our conversation to how to do what has to be done to structure and maintain a right balance for platform engineering team as well. But the first question is, most of the people saying that platform engineering exists today because we are solving the problem of DevOps that wouldn't exist if we structure and maintain a right balance in the team in the first place and get rid of the tooling. So, what's your key take on this?
That's a very interesting point, and every skepticism is healthy. I think we have to continuously challenge our assumptions, and I think to a high level it is true. Like platform teams today are solving the problems we have today. A lot of the challenges we have today come from decisions we made in the past. It is true. However, we have to remember that we made those decisions in the past because they were solving issues we had before. And I've been around tech long enough that I saw this transformation from, one of my first jobs ever in tech was actually at this startup where we had a physical data center. So I had a chance to work on like physical data centers, emerging cloud. At some point in my career, I was part of Microsoft of the Azure team when we were building cloud. So I've kind of gone from like physical data centers, VMs, cloud, microservices to now this world of like Kubernetes, platforms, all those things. So every step of the way has been solving problems. And of course, when you solve a problem, you make some choices, and those choices tend to have side effects. And those are hard to predict. And it is true. In a perfect world, we might not need a lot of the tooling that we had because, yeah, we're dealing with decisions of the past. But the reality is, that's to me is kind of becomes kind of a more of an academic argument because one, you can't change the past. Two, and this is very important for everybody, like software exists and software, you can't, it's very rare now when you walk into a business and you get to do everything from zero, right? There is legacy. There are applications already running and creating value for the business. So a lot of the changes we do on the world nowadays is incremental. Now, that being said, I do believe that even in this perfect world, there is a huge value of having a platform team because as applications become more critical for businesses, as software becomes a core part of pretty much every business, we have to evolve the way we think about this to build more specialization. Platform teams bring a lot of specialization. Platform teams can build this base layer for every other software team to be able to go faster. When it's well done, and it's something that a friend told me the other day that I really like, he said, hey, a good platform team removes the opportunity for teams to waste time. How? By creating standards, by automating a lot of things, by kind of like centralizing choices that impact everybody. Because, and here's where it gets very interesting, right? Especially at scale, we developers tend to think more in terms of what benefits our team, but we rarely have the visibility of like what benefits the entire business, right? What happens when you switch from one team to another? Do you have to then spend 6 months learning another technology? Or is it better if everybody has the same stack? This kind of challenges and decisions is what I think that the platform team really brings to the table. And a good, strong platform team that is empathic to the developers, but also understands the business needs, provides an immense value, and really takes a huge load from every software team.
Absolutely, 100% true. I think you concluding in a very superb way, and you actually aligning the conversation to the next question, and that is always around the question number two. Is I think like I'm trying having a different time, difficult time, and understanding how do I answer it. I'm actually sharing with you is now. So a lot of the people right now saying the platform engineering is focused on solving the problem that exists only for reasons that tools had bring in complexity with us with them, like, and we weren't quite sure those tools exist in a stable form in the longer run. So I think the question becomes this: right now you have so many tools in the cloud native ecosystem, picking and choosing make it very difficult for you. But on this topic of the same question, you weren't quite sure that tool you're actually using an open source model will be exist after 5 years in a same stable form. It might change. It has too many moving pieces in it, and might in future it's bring in too much of the complexity. So now people thinking the platform engineering only exists today because the cloud native computing foundation brings in too much tooling and brings in too many decisions to make, and we weren't able to make good decision in the past and right now.
Yeah, that's another one that I hear a lot, and it's very interesting. I think there is some merit to it. Do we have a lot of tools? Yes, but I think it's always been the case, because developers, we all have different needs. That's one thing, right? Also, we developers love building tools. Like, I haven't met a developer that hasn't created something, whether it's a tool just for yourself, a script. Like, I have a lot of scripts on my GitHub account for things that I do all the time, like getting my kube config, uh, setting up my signing key for GitHub, right? I have all these tools. Some of them are private, others I've open sourced and shared with the rest of the world, like Octeto. So that's something that exists. I think the explosion of tooling is something that was going to happen no matter what, because we have more and more developers. We're building a lot more software. Like, I don't know if there's like a metric for this, right? But like kind of like if we had something like the GDP, like the software created per person in the world, right? It's radically bigger than 10, 20 years ago, right? Like 20 years ago, the internet was not broadly available. 10 years ago, the panorama of like apps were not really a thing as big as they are now. Now everything is software. My TV has software, my fridge has software, cars, of course. Everything, like from the time you wake up to the time you kind of like get to work, you interact with software hundreds, if not thousands of times. So we need tools to build this software. The way I think about it is kind of in reverse. Is I think the CNCF has done a really good job at kind of officializing what you're saying. It says, hey, we in industry acknowledge that there's a lot of tools. We also acknowledge that adopting a tool at scale is expensive. So when a tool is adopted and then it gets abandoned, that's very expensive for everybody. And kind of going to your point, right? Imagine if like, I don't know, Nginx was suddenly not supported. That would be like terrible for everybody, right? And Nginx is supported by very few people. So please donate if you can to them. It's a core part of the internet. And I think the CNCF has done a really good job with this model of like sandbox, foundations, and then kind of these progressions to help the industry say, hey, you know what? This 10, 20 tools, look at what has graduated. These 10, 20 tools are the tools that have a good governance model. They have good support. They have enough maintainers to make sure that it keeps going. And they do it because we as an industry, we can all vote it with our keyboard. We voted by using them. Say, hey, Kubernetes, Prometheus, Argo, Flux. These are things that we all need to be around and well maintained. So I think the CNCF is doing a good job. I think the platform teams is also, a response to this. I don't think that platform is kind of like the chicken and egg thing, right? Like, I believe that tools existed before platform teams. I think platform teams have always existed. We're just not called that. But like I've always known people. I've been that person in many teams where you are creating common things. Whether it's a script that you're sharing, right? A bash script, or you write a README on like how to launch this application, or you create a CI pipeline that everybody can leverage to run their tests. All those things are platforms. They're not like the big kind of formal platform we have now, but it was the same principle of creating this common tooling so we can all use the same. We don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So I think that platforms are actually, I think of them more as stewards, like by making these choices in a way that ideally is with like a lot of thought into it, with empathy and understanding the needs of their users. Platform teams can actually isolate you from this immense number of tooling, so that you can just do works. Imagine imagine you work for a company with 100 engineers, and let's say you have 10 different teams, and every team owns, I'm going to simplify things, but owns a microservice that represents a business function, and you'll have to work together. Option A with no platform team is then you have 10 teams. Every team needs to figure out their own source control, their own CI, their own cloud, their own deployment, their own monitoring story, their own observability story, their own on-call CD, best practices, their own language, right? And I've worked at companies like that where because they gave everybody so much freedom, you end up with 10 teams that look like 10 different companies. And then what happens? When you need help from another team, they don't know. There's no expertise to be shared because, my team is the Go team and yours is like the Python, another one is using Rust. So by moving to platform, you make it easier for, all these decisions to be made once. And sometimes, yeah, it won't be perfect for everybody. And that's where like a good platform needs to be built in with scale valves so that when the platform is not good for you, you can integrate whatever other tools. But overall, like it's very important to realize that because we have so much tooling, because applications can be very complex, because we're dealing with an ecosystem with many pieces, platform teams are the firewall. So they focus on making those choices so that we can focus on building business value and preventing us from having all these old school fights of like space versus tabs, or are we on GitLab or GitHub? You know what? The business chooses, and then we all pick that choice and then go as fast as we can with that. And that to me is the main business value of having a good platform team, and why I feel like software teams with a strong platform teams have a huge advantage over teams who are more like loosely coupled and everybody kind of doing their own thing, just because they're going to be spending a lot more time solving these fundamentals instead of building business value.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. 100% agreed on this as well. So I think another question, like we started the conversation a very good note and you made some wonderful points so that the next conversation is being very more generic now. So now the platform team is, we see the need of the platform. And you mentioned like, we heard this coin term now, but it's been exist for a while now. The same is true for you sees the term container often. That's been actually coined too much often these days, but remember this exists for the last 15 to 16 years in Google, and they spoke about every day what containers is, what orchestration is, but we doesn't even know about these terminologies. And then it came into the market as we see exploration of tools, and so much things came up from that one mantra of containers and orchestration technologies. The next question I wanted to people understand might be here: what are the benefits of incorporating a DevOps culture into the platform engineering team structure? Because we already have existing knowledge of DevOps, is there a value of bringing in existing knowledge into the platform engineering team structure?
Interesting. I mean, yeah, definitely. I think we should bring DevOps culture into every team. I think the DevOps kind of revolution brought a lot of really good things to the table. Like people mock this kind of like YAML everywhere, and yeah, it's kind of funny that you have like 3 4 different YAMLs per repo and everything. But all this like X as code, infra as code, dev experience as code, CD as code, I think is fantastic because you set it up once, it's programmatic, you can put it on source control, and then everybody can consume it. So I think that is very important for platform teams to kind of continue this tradition of having everything defined as code, because it makes it a lot easier. Like doing things by hand is important. You need to do it sometimes, but kind of having the brunt of your configuration on a YAML or whatever format you want, right? So the machine can consume it and do this work for you in a way that is repeatable, that you always get the same output. That is something we have to bring everywhere, and I think most platforms start that way. Like, and platform can be as fancy as you want, but it can also be as simple as a YAML, an Argo rollout, and then you have a common way of deploying. And even in kind of like that more simplistic or simple, not simplistic, simple way, it's super beneficial, because if I have to remember every time the commands I need to follow to do a deployment, which is something that we do ideally multiple times per day, compared to like, hey, there's a YAML that describes the steps, just run one command, and the YAML gets consumed and executed. When you need to make a change, you put in the YAML, you send a pull request, people see it, and then everybody else gets the benefit. To me, it's like super magical, right? Like in the older days, you had to do all this by hand. You had to communicate to everybody. Hey, we have a new process. Now, when you deploy to production, you have to do this other thing with this system, and now it's like fully automatic. That to me is amazing, and that to me is one of those examples of how everything we're doing, like it's been built on the past, right? And In the early days, machine production was done by hand. Then I'm gonna jump a few generations, but then we had things like Puppet and Chef that gonna help us automate this at scale. Then we had containers, which is kind of like the first kind of built as code, everything defined in a Docker file, one of my favorite technologies. And it just keeps advancing, right? Then we have like, these Jamas and Kubernetes and crossplane, all these kind of things that are like wonderful. So I think it's very important to, as we think of platforms, for all of you who are building platforms, do not ignore the past. Let's keep the good things about the past. I think DevOps is a really good thing. It changed the way we think about production deployments, stability, availability. Let's keep that. And yeah, let's iterate, let's improve, of course. You can argue, is YAML the right format? I don't think it matters because it's not about YAML. It's about having, you know, all your practices, all your best practices codified in a way that machines can make it repeatable. That to me is something that we need to keep going. And, in my opinion, I think that is kind of core to what platform teams are trying to do. I will find it hard. Maybe they don't call it that way, but I would find it hard to find a platform engineer who's not leveraging a lot of like the practices of the DevOps culture. And I like that you call it a culture. I think it's a really good way to calling it because I'm a DevOps is not a job; it's a culture, and I like the way you're describing it. It makes a lot of sense.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one question I think on the same topic is very important right now is the boundaries people say is often blurry between dev and ops people. So previously you just write an application and throw it over to the wall and that the DevOps people take care of the application and making sure they are highly resilient when they deployed on the infrastructure that we manage as a DevOps team. But right now, what's happening is developer is actually working with infrastructure every day on the likes of Docker file. Like Docker file, you said that I need a networking 80 port 80. I need a disk domain. You set up storage in the Docker file. You set up everything. So now people say, oh, it's incredibly useful because we have a unified language that every employee in the organization can speak about the same language. But they often describe that boundaries are blurry. But which portion of the Docker file is belong to the developers portion and which one is for the DevOps team, and then making very difficult. Like developer often use observability tool that DevOps don't know, and then the people use the observability tool that are in the production, but the developer team doesn't even heard about the name for the observability tool. So you have a different of tooling in the different set, and that's the same question I'm asking. When you have too much opinion around the tooling, then the DevOps choose Prometheus Grafana, and the developer choose, let's say, Elasticsearch, and there are some misconfiguration all the way around in the Docker file, and then still the battle is going on. Like I don't, it is not my fault. It's other the battle is changed now because we can't say the application doesn't work is because of not my fault. Application works everywhere, but now the battle is infrastructure has been broken. Then who is going to be responsible of breaking down that infrastructure? So the question is now become is like how to identify the roles and responsibilities of different team members, and then on top of that responsibility, what access you can give to the different team members.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and you're right. The boundaries are very blurry. And it's interesting because I feel like, and as you said, I think you put it really well. Um, the olden days, right? Like developers wrote code, then there was a wall. You threw your code over the wall, and then like production, like operations were like, yeah, we run it. Then DevOps came, and there's this whole change in mentality. We're like, no, if you build it, you must run it, and that's kind of led to teams kind of like had to become experts on everything, all the way from code, network configuration to running, right? And then we had this kind of like I saw some companies who kind of had this model where like there was like a DevOps SWAT team that would kind of like help all these teams get started, and then they were like, hey, now you run it and let me know if you have any issues. And I think that created this extra pressure on developers to kind of have to know everything, which I've never agreed with. So that's one of my kind of like hot takes is I don't think developers should be on the hook for running things. I think the skills of running in production are very different from writing code. I think they have to be aware. It has to be collaboration. I think that's where like the blurriness helps. But I do believe like kind of that model of SRE that came out of Google. I think makes a lot of sense. I think that it's not a coincidence that both Kubernetes and the SRE kind of model both came from Google because I think both of them are evolutions of like developers and operations being separate. Then DevOps, which was a strong correction towards you have to do everything. And now I think we're back, kind of moving back to a more reasonable center where platform teams are kind of now owning this kind of golden path to production. And then developers have this kind of like, I call it kind of like, it's kind of like when you get on a roller coaster and the road is there, like it's still like ups and downs, but there's some rails that can get you there. I think the platform team provides the rails, and then the developers have to put things on the cards. I think that's much better, and I think that's where going back to like what I see as kind of best in class platforms is having the empathy to build a great developer experience to take into consideration everything you've said, right? Like what tools do developers need? Like when something goes wrong in production, what do I need to provide for developers? How can a developer and platform and SREs collaborate to make sure that when something goes wrong in production, everybody involved has the right level of visibility? Are they able to troubleshoot? Do they have the right observability in place? Do they have the right telemetry, the right logging, all that stuff? And I think that's what it's very important for all of us to understand that it's not an if else, right? It's like you need all of these things. You need a standardized path to production. You need platform to make some choices. But you also need the platform to be open so developers can plug in whatever they need, because at the end of the day, when there's a bug in production, SREs can't do anything. Platform might be able to do something if is a platform bug. But and by the way, let me take a step back. SREs can't do anything from the perspective of like troubleshooting a production, like a product bug. Like at that point, you need the developer. So you need to involve the developer to make sure they have the right tools in place at the right time to validate this. Like I've talked to a lot of companies through my work where they have a complete separation between developers and production to the point where like developers have no access to containers or Kubernetes. They only write code locally. And that creates a lot of friction when a developer is trying to figure out why is this failing in production. I think a platform where developers have access to the same types of tools in dev, in test, in prod, where there's less of a difference between your dev environment and what happens in production, where SREs, platform engineers, dev all collaborate. To me, that is the gold standard. And I was talking to one of our customers, and I love what they said, which is that, hey, they said for the platform team, their developer is the customer. They are customers. We have to accommodate their needs. We need to make sure we build a platform that they choose and that they're going to make them feel good about the work they do. If they have to fight the platform, if the platform gets in the way, we're not doing a good job. And to me, that was a really succinct way of kind of saying, hey, that is the mission of the platform team. If it gets in the way, then it's not doing a good job. Because otherwise, is going back to what you said, which is otherwise, without a platform, every developer needs to be an expert on everything. And that means you have less time to be really good at the thing that makes a difference in your company. And I'm pretty sure that for most of us, configuring network policies is not what makes our companies different. That is something we have to do, and it's very important, don't get me wrong. But when you hire an engineer, that is not what provides value to your customers, right? That's what's important to kind of fix that fast, make it standard, and then enable developers to provide value as fast as possible. And I always repeat that because I think to me that is the most important aspect of platforms is they have to be an accelerator. They have to make it easier for you as a developer to be better at your job. And that to me is the measure of a successful platform is when you're just going faster and you don't even realize it.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think you are perfectly right here. I think what we can describe, we can actually tell people in a example like this. Where let's say you're actually, if you happen to watch Formula One car, I'm being a very nerdy and watching Formula One. I think their Grand Prix are wonderful technology plus how driver use this technology to win the race. So if you look, let's say if your car and the design is faster, like you can actually go to the speed of, I think Formula One car right now it's 340 miles 45 miles per hour, and if you can go beyond 365 miles per hour, you are have a speedy car. But doesn't mean you win all the races with 365 miles per hour, because you need more than this. Because on a turn, like you have a turn, a very dangerous turn in the Formula One car, you can't take a 365 miles per hour and take a turn. It's something very bad happened to you. So I think it's the same thing, like you mentioned, if your company is have a wonderful dedicated team of engineers who can build a network policy, that doesn't make you a difference with other companies, because what your requirement is to actually solve a business need, and today's business demands very fast 360 miles per hour speed to solve a problem. That is quite a speed that business need to change to keep up with. Absolutely. So I think on the topic of this question, and I will ask one few more questions to wrap up the discussion here. So what is like I think one of the key question right now people might have, and they have a platform engineering team, like you work with a lot of the customers. If I look good, if I go to the octato.com, some of the wonderful customers I see you happen to work with, I think every month, every week, every day. So I believe those customers and your team also have a platform engineering team or some kind of team. What metrics or indicator can help evaluate the effectiveness of a platform engineering team structure?
That's a really good topic. It's something that we spend a lot of time talking about with our customers because, as you said, and it's really interesting. Like Octero tends to be adopted first by the platform team, and then it gets rolled out to the rest of the company. So very early in our engagement with our customers or prospects, we talk about this: is how do you evaluate the effectiveness of a platform team, of the solutions, and everything. And there's different schools of thought here, but one of my favorite ones, and it's kind of controversial, but it is developer satisfaction. Going back to this concept of the developer is the customer of the platform team. One of the things that I've seen teams do very successfully is actually do surveys. There's now a lot of tools to do this, but it's a very simple question I've seen a lot of companies ask is, hey, how much friction do you think there is in your day-to-day work? Like what gets in the way of your day-to-day work? And asking these two questions are very simple. It has to be like a certain trust built so that developers will answer truthfully. But that is one that kind of helps a lot to understand from a developer perspective, what is getting in the way. Because sometimes, you get surprised. It's not the obvious things. It's not like, oh, a slow CI. For most of the cases I've seen is a lot of like what I call death by 1,000 paper cuts, which is all these small things that make my life very frustrating and makes me like not want to innovate, makes me not want to push the boundaries. So that's one. The other is, and this is where like platform teams can be very successful, like platforms sit at the middle of everything, right? So you have a lot of data that you can harvest to understand what are their pain points. So number one is adoption. Like you should never make your platform mandatory. It should be like, hey, we have this platform. If you want to subscribe to our model, this is better. If not, you do your own thing. So just the same way that PMs measure, monthly active users of their products, I think platform teams need to measure, hey, are developers opting into our platform? Are they using it all the time? That's one. The other that I like a lot, and this kind of comes from the DORA model, is lead times. How long it takes a feature to go from ideation to production. Because, the hypothesis is that if you have a good platform, it is faster. So you could measure that, you can measure time to failure, you can measure, you know, how fast it takes for a change. I like this one a lot, which is how fast it takes for a change to go, from your keyword to production. Like I have a change. I have a friend that said, hey, you should measure how fast can I change one line on the company website. There's a typo. You want to change it. How fast that takes. I think those are things that platform teams can measure. They're certainly easy. And it's a way to measure the success because I think developers are fairly honest with the usage because the moment that the platform is not great, they will find a way around it. Maybe by using it less, maybe by deploying less, maybe by spinning up, rogue infrastructure on the side. And that one to me is very important. And that's where like I really, really like this mentality of the platform thing, thinking of developers as their customers, kind of thinking of developers as, hey, we have to give them something valuable so they choose to use the platform. Even if the platform is something that's mandatory, that there's no choice around it, which I think most companies do, I think platform teams still need to take that mentality to make sure that they are providing the best possible value to people. There's this talk that my friend Ivan Pedrazas, he's from Spain, lives in England. He was a Docker. I'll tweet later the link, but he gave this talk at a meetup in London. I was lucky to attend on this topic, and I think he's going to give a similar talk on DockerCon. So once those are available, check it out on these principles of building a platform and these principles of like, hey, you have to drive usage, kind of invite the developer because you show them that the platform is going to get them faster, but don't force it and give them options. I think all those are wonderful things that platform teams should kind of make part of like their day to day because they do make for a much better partnership. And I think at the end of the day, it creates a lot more value for everybody involved.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think I think that's will lead us to the final question of the talk of the tonight here is, are there any industry specific consideration when designing the structure of the platform engineering team? So I believe it's in infinity, but you're still noticing some of the common things while while going in the meetups, conferences, and interacting with the customers. So what are the few things that you notice very common?
That's an interesting. So industry specific considerations for the structure of the platform teams. I think something that's emerging that I like a lot in platform teams is kind of like having people who give developer experience a very high value. Like, this kind of like platform engineers who like think in terms of like, how do I want to expose these tools? Like Backstage is a good example of this, right? When Backstage was built, there's a lot of thought process to like, hey, what does the UI look like? The experience has to be very polished. I think that's a consideration of like platform teams now having this kind of like UX, UI component. I think that's something that before wasn't that thought of. I think another industry-wide trend is to have more of the developer kind of engineer as a platform team member instead of just recruiting, operations, DevOps, infra kind of people. I think that modern platforms have a developer component. They're not just infra. And I think that's something that, when you go to CubeCon or, a few of this kind of like, there's now a DC event called App Developer Con, and you go talk there. You'll see these, the conversation is shifting. It's not just about infra. It's not just about like, oh yeah, how do I abstract AWS or Kubernetes? I think now there's a lot of talks around how do I provide high level, vertically integrated services like what we do, right? Environment as service or secret management as a service or application templates or documentation. So I think this trend of making it much higher level, more adapted to the business and not just about the infra is a trend that is driving the structure of the teams to also include people who are good at these things, even like PMs. I now see a lot of like platform teams internal who have a platform PM who is, collecting requirements and talking internally and measuring all the results. And I think all that is very important.
Yes, absolutely. I think I quite 100% agree to it. A lot of the conferences actually happening right now is around industry practices, how to set up platform engineering team. I believe there are actually things happening in the CNCF is right now. One of the thing I can actually shout out to one of the wonderful team members actually participating in is in the platform white paper. It's tell you how to reduce a cognitive load from the platform teams and the development teams. Number one, it tells you that accelerated development growth. If you want to be move like a Formula One speedy car, think for your decision making, how to do it, and that's a paper for it. And also, we're working on the platform maturity model, like giving you some kind of a ladder. Like step one is this: you have how to do investment in platform, how to do operations in the platform space, and bunch of very cool things actually came coming up in the next few months. So
Yeah.
that's actually tells us where the industry is going. So as to your point, like it's a lot of the movement is actually happening on those points as well. So before we wrap up the discussion, there are some rapid fire question to ask here. Just a few, like I ask the question, yeah, try to answer in a very few words. Number one, do you think, and it's very critical, we can do a full podcast on that one. I believe we have spoke about it in the past in the off the call, but you'll take key take again. Few words about the role of developer relations and developer advocacy for a team for the organization building the platform.
It's very important because you have to show people how it works and what's the value. You can't just build it and assume people will learn it. Like you have to show it. I think that DevRel, dev advocacy, is something very important at every level of software, and it's fundamental for platform teams.
Yes, absolutely. And next question, like, how many are conferences in a year CEO of the company and the other people in the company should attend? Because every month, every day, every hour, there's a new conference happening. Your key takeaway for these 4, 5 conferences you should attend.
That's a good one. I attend a lot of conferences. I like them. I do a lot of public speaking. I think that as a CEO of a company, as a founder, or like as a high level exec, the most important thing you have to ask yourself is what is the value of you attending a conference? Because there is a material cost, time, money, flights, but there's also the opportunity cost of you doing something else with your time. So I don't think it's a hard number. It really depends. I've seen CEOs who very successful attend, many conferences because as the CEO, you are the ambassador of the company. So if you want to spread the message, conferences are a good place. So I would recommend not go every month, but do stick with some. Stick with the ones that your ecosystem cares. KubeCon is a very important conference for all of us in Kubernetes environment. Just make sure that you have a plan, right? Like, what do you want to go to the conference? Are you looking for customers? Are you looking for kind of build your brand? Do you want to be part of the conversation? All of them are very important. It depends on what stage of the company you're in. Just be careful because it's very easy to get caught up in the conference circuit and then you just go to conferences and you think you're doing a good job. But if they're not helping you move your company forward, then you should be careful. So it's an it depends kind of answer, but you know, 4 or 5 a year I think is a good number though. Like it's kind of what I try to limit myself to, and find the ones that are influential. You have to go where your customers are. That's the more important thing, because a lot of conferences are for like your peers, which are useful, but you have to go where your customers are. think we're having a bit of a networking situation here. I don't know if Sam can hear me. I guess this is where I do a sing and dance show while we wait for Sam to come back. But I think we're still live. So while he's back, just I'm very active on Twitter. My handle is there, rberiesa. If you want to continue the conversation on this topic, open source, developer experience, platform, I'm a huge geek on those things. So please, reach out. I'm also going to be at CubeCon, even if you're attending. I'm going to be speaking at the day-seed event called App Developer Con. We're going to be talking about preview environments and why they're so useful to make the software process more inclusive and productive. So if you're there, please stop by, say hi, and it'll be fantastic to continue the conversation after the stream is over.